All right, we're live, Kenny. Welcome, everybody out there. Thank you to the Legal Curve boys, as usual, who are probably wrapping up right about now. We usually see a nice little bump from their show as they throw off to us, so that's perfect. We appreciate that. Kenny, how are you doing tonight?
I am excellent, Sean. How about yourself?
Not too bad. I think I'm liking playing here. We got the nice, pretty backdrop. We got the scoreboard in the background. Waddy here is saying, because I know there's been some people asking for us to wear the headbands. I'm going to have to get one for each one. We have to do a headband show where we both do the headband and see if we can't get some logos. But you're right, Waddy. You're probably going to have to wait until it's an away game, which it's coming up next. So you never know what you're going to see on the Kenny and Renny show. But what we know we're going to see tonight is some great analysis by my main man, Kenny, here. And I want to get an idea of your thoughts with that game, because it's one of those games that kind of looked almost like the perfect game for the Winnipeg Jets. Everything you would have expected with them. And then towards the end of it, suddenly it got a little bit white knuckle there. And do you fault them for that? Is this one of these games you feel a little bit less confident in because of the way things ended?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Jets, for the most part, are going to be pretty happy with their victory. I mean, Andrew Kopp did admit that maybe they took their foot off the pedal slightly in that third period. I guess they kind of, what I would say, Sean, I mean, I think that Anton Forsberg just allowed his group to hang around by continually making saves. I mean, we've known this from the very beginning. The Senators aren't really a team that goes away. So is it a concern? I mean, would it raise your eyebrows slightly? Sure. But I mean, the shot attempts, the shots, everything that we talk about so often about the Jets, they cleaned up a great deal of it. And offensively, they were able to generate so much more. Sean, on Friday night, we talked about the benefit of the Jets having that extra day between games after such a big, busy March. They did have an extra jump tonight, and they got on the board early. And the fact of the matter is, Sean, I think that the Jets sort of left the door open in the first period more than in the third period by allowing those 3 power plays to transpire for the Senators. But their penalty killing was solid. I would say they generated plenty of offense. And defensively, a couple lapses, sure. I mean, I think Forbert kind of got caught a little bit in between on that drop pass for the Connor Brown goal. But overall, they were very solid. And that game, as Paul Maurice kind of pointed out afterward, that game was in control. And part of the reason that it was in control was the strong start that the Jets had. And, I mean, we know that Dubois got it going, converting that pass from Blake Wheeler. And I know that we'll talk about Dubois quite a bit today.
Yeah, we'll get to it.
But that shift was kind of generated. It was a continuation of a great shift from that Mark Scheifele line. You know, the Lowry line came out strong, and then Scheifele went out over the boards. The Jets got some zone time, had a line change, and then lo and behold, it's in the back of the net. So a lot of positives for the Jets, of course. I mean, I know everyone will say, yes, the Senators are a last place team. But hey, the Senators have been giving a lot of teams trouble. And that's not just teams saying that. They've beaten Toronto in this last stretch of 8 games, only 1 regulation loss. They beat Toronto and they beat Montreal. I mean, those are facts. I mean, does that mean some team? I don't think the Jets took them lightly. They talked all about it the last 2 days about how much they respect their opponent, and then they went out and played well. I mean, of course, it's just a 1-game series, and they got done what they needed to get done. But I think the Jets really played a solid overall game. At times, the Senators were overmatched, but they didn't go away. So, I mean, I think you have to give them credit for that. We talked so much about culture when it comes to G.J. Smith and what he's done behind the bench. But right now, there's a talent discrepancy when it comes to those two teams.
Entirely. So you don't agree with this assessment by Al Abraham that the Jets let up in the third?
I mean, I think they may have let up slightly, but they still had generated enough scoring chances to extend the lead. And then they kind of just... The power play goal by Norris, he was wide open, had a great shot. And then, like I said, I mean, I don't know if it was a line change. We were trying to discuss this up top, Sean. I mean, on that play, the Jets just kind of had a little bit of a breakdown. Forbert stepped up, and then the puck squirted past him, and before you knew it, Anisimov was leaving it on the drop pass to Connor Brown. So, I mean, I don't think they necessarily let up, but it is also human nature when a team has a 4-1 lead. Let up. I mean, does it mean that they weren't pressing? I mean, they were also, It wasn't that there's two things about this, Blake. I totally understand where you're coming from. There's two ways that these games can go. And a team gets up 4-1, you can sort of go away from the system and try to go point night and go all offense, or they maybe sit back a little. Did they sit back a little bit? Sure. But I don't think that the Jets, totally went and collapsed. I mean, I think that the goaltender kept them in the game, and then the Senators converted a couple of chances.
I'm going to just give a quick shout out here to Deborah Berman, who actually does dress me, Jets freak.
There you go.
Now, Kenny is the kind of guy, he's a suave gentleman. He can put that kind of stuff together. I can't.
This is a F apparel special right here. Got to give the boys a shout out there too for your suit needs. Local guys here.
For Kenny, for me, my suits literally show up on the doorstep with instructions on what to put with shirts. So I don't necessarily know whether or not everyone gets those instructions, or they've looked at the way I've dressed myself in the past and figured that I'm the kind of guy who needs instructions. I am. I'm glad they picked up on that. But hey, we're Kenny and Renny. We're a duo on this show, and sometimes you got to show up in uniform. That's how it goes.
Total accident.
Let's get into Dubois. Let's launch into Dubois because.
Hang on one second. I know that the folks on the side. I mean, I understand why people would want that game to turn from 4-1 to 8-1, but the reality is that that's just not the way a lot of games work. The shots on goal in the third period were 10-9 for Winnipeg. It's not like they spent the entire period hanging out at the red line and saying, come at us. I mean, I think it was mostly evenly played. Yes, the Senators got 2 goals, but I don't think that the Jets necessarily let up. That's all I'm saying. Were there some, lapses in the third period? Yes, but they weren't reckless, and they also were not careless. So for me, sure, I mean, you have to take note of what happened on the ice, but I don't think that this was an issue that the Jets were all of a sudden not respecting their opponent. I mean, was there not the same urgency in the first as there was in the third, or in the third as there was in the first tie? Sure, you're right. The Jets were rested and came out of the gate and wanted to take it to their opponent. I mean, it's not like they just let the Sens. I mean, there have been times this year when the Jets have sat back in the third period with the lead. I don't think that was necessarily the case.
I'll say this. Maurice talked about this Senators team as being the kind of team that if you don't play to your strengths as a team against the Senators, they'll beat you. And I do think that third period, I don't know if I'd call it letting up, but I do think that the Jets stopped playing to their strengths. They stopped getting on the forecheck. They stopped pressuring the puck. And as soon as they did that, the Sens kind of bounced back in the game. I don't think it's, Paul Maurice had said going into that game, and he said afterwards that he very much respects this Senators team, and he believes that he respects them more than most do, and he also believes that's why they're 5-1 against the Senators, because they do respect them, and he takes them as a significant opponent. I would say there's a little bit in that game where the Jets stopped doing what the Jets do well, and that's exactly what Paul Maurice is talking about. That's what that team can do to you if you stop playing to your strengths.
One quick one here. I just want to run through this, Sean. The only team that is yet to lose a game to the Senators this year, Edmonton Oilers, 7-0. Everybody else has had some level of difficulty. 5 wins for the Senators against Calgary. They also have not beaten the Vancouver Canucks, but 4-3 against the Habs, and they have 3-3 record against the Toronto Maple Leafs. So, I mean, yes, they're in last place, but that's life. I mean, this is a team that plays hard. They need to get their skill level up, no doubt about it, but I think they're building something there, and there are some very impressive prospects coming into the system. But as the fans are thinking, I mean, the Jets need to win those kind of games if they want to try to get second place. They moved into second place right now. Can they stay there? Well, we'll see what happens when they face the Montreal Canadiens coming up in this 2-game set.
You know what? I left something out. People are asking about the suits. I'd feel terrible. I know this is off hockey, but I do get suits from Vittorio Rossi as well. And I wanted to mention that because they're in the city here and they're absolutely phenomenal. And I would suggest to anyone, if you're looking for a good suit and a good fit, and people who, for people like me who don't know anything about this kind of stuff, and if you're one of those people, that's who you go to in the city from my experience. Really great, phenomenal people. Enjoy dealing with them. What do you got?
Quick one here. Ty has asked about the Kachuk elbow. Did you think it was intentional? Is this a sneaky, dirty play, or was this unintended consequences? The elbow, the reverse hit elbow on Wheeler.
What do I think?
Yeah, what do you think?
I think players like that throw their limbs out to try and catch a piece of guys. I think that's an example of him trying to get turning and knowing that that's a lane that if Wheeler is going to avoid that hit, that's the lane he's got to be into. And he's essentially just instinctually throwing limbs and whatever he can into the lane that if Wheeler's going to get by him, that's where he's going to go. And it ends up being an elbow. So, I think it's an instinctual play. I didn't think he was thinking I'm going to throw a spinning elbow at the guy.
Right.
But I do think it's an effort to get a piece of him. And it's an effort to get a piece of him with his elbow. So, call it what you will. That's how players like that play.
Yep.
We saw lots of comments about it on Twitter and people being upset with it. And I get it. If you're a Jets fan, you should be upset about it because, it's the same thing as your stick. You got to keep your body under control. And if you're throwing an elbow up in this direction here, especially if you're his height, if it's going to hit someone, it's probably going to hit him in the head. So, I don't think it was a spinning elbow that he was trying to land.
Right.
But I do think he's getting big, trying to grab a piece of him. And in doing so, he elbowed him in the head. And that's how it goes.
The league looks at all those hits. I don't think it's a suspension. I don't think it was as necessarily as blatant as the McDavid elbow the other day, to be quite frank. Obviously, reputation would hurt Brady in that situation, but I don't think that there will be a suspension or anything else. And someone saying a double minor, I think you can only give. I don't think it was worth a major. I think it was a minor penalty, and that's all. Move on from there.
I'm taking a lot of heat tonight. This was hilarious. I love it. Let's get to Dubois. Dubois had a great game. So it's funny. Sure. We just did a hit on Sportsnet. If you're watching your TV, you're going to see Kenny and I do a hit on Sportsnet. And I started out, and before we did it, I'd said, can I bring up Laine? Can I bring up the whole idea? Because the one thing that we knew about Patrick Laine was he, at a young age, was the kind of player who could win games for the Winnipeg Jets. And, if you're going to have to trade that guy, you want to trade him for someone who can do similar things. Now, I know they go get Pierre-Luc Dubois because they want strength down the middle, and that's great. And he's great defensively, and he makes you better in all of those ways. But he really has shown already that he's a kind of player who, when he has shown up offensively, he's affecting the outcome of games.
Yeah, no doubt about that, Sean. And the one thing, too, we know from what Pierre-Luc Dubois has been saying in every single interview that he's done so far, essentially, is that he always wants more from himself. And I can pretty much guarantee that after things didn't go the way that he had been hoping for against the Toronto Maple Leafs, we went into the series wondering what the Dubois versus Matthews matchup was going to look like. And that line had 2 goals in the first period, and the Jets abandoned the matchup. And that line was basically held off the board for both games of the series. So Pierre-Luc Dubois gets an extra day of rest. And yes, we know he's only 22 years old, but March was a hectic month for the Jets, and Dubois was no different. And he talked about it after I asked him about it on the Zoom call, about the importance, even though it was only a 30-minute practice on Sunday afternoon. He talked about the importance. Here's a guy he's been used on a lot of different lines, and he's barely had any time to skate with those guys under practice circumstances. So I think it was very important. You've talked about it, Sean. There's been a great little chemistry created because of Wheeler's ability to hold on to the puck and create a little bit of extra space. That was on display for the first goal. Wheeler held on to the puck, Dubois gets open, and he roofs his shot. And then on the second goal, another great example of comfort. Pierre-Luc Dubois has played on that half wall on the second power play unit since his arrival. But he hasn't been getting a ton of touches because the second unit runs as a shooting unit through Pionk and Ehlers at the top and on the left-hand point. So, good puck movement, Copp with a great pass across, and Dubois buries it. So 2 important things. A 2-goal game is something that, I mean, we've seen it a couple times from Dubois. And as you mentioned, here's a guy who's got 2 overtime winning goals and basically had a big impact game here this evening. Yes, it's against Ottawa, but these are the type of games that Dubois will flourish in during the stretch run, in my opinion.
I've been beating this drum for a long time. Paul Maurice, I know, agrees with me because he's brought it up, but it seems to me like there's just a real built-in chemistry between he and Blake Wheeler. Did you find it strange that after a breakout game like this, that Paul Maurice is essentially saying, yeah, it's great. I love that they've got chemistry, and there's an expiry date on this line because this is going to be changing. Did you find that strange?
It was certainly interesting. I know that you like it because of what we've discussed on other options that Paul Maurice may be looking at. I like the combo platter. I do think that we know that Maurice calls that his safe place when he goes Scheifele, Connor, and Wheeler, and we know that that causes some little bit of an uproar on social media and in our comments box. But I do think that there is something worth exploring when it comes to Wheeler and Dubois staying together a little bit more long term. Who's going to be the winger on that other side? We've talked about this, Sean. Whether it's going to be Copp, whether it's going to be Stastny, whether it's going to be Kyle Connor. We know that there are options at the Jets' disposal. Was it interesting that he let it slip? Well, he almost let the game slip. He basically said, "Well, let's see you at the end of this road trip." He might have been thinking in his head it might not even last that long. But, I mean, let's see how this goes. I mean, we know that, I think Rob Garner mentioned, I mean, sure, you don't have to care about the games against Ottawa except for the number of games that the Jets give up. We know that the Jets are playing the Senators 10 times. Can they go 9-1? Well, we'll see. But what we know right now is the record is 5-1. So you can only play the teams that are on the schedule. Do the Jets need to be better and show they can have a better record against Toronto and Edmonton if they want to advance? Of course. But let's also not ignore the fact that the Jets have 6 points in the season series and the Leafs have 8. So it's been very even. Yes, with the exception of a couple games, Toronto definitely carried the play. But there have been a couple games where the Jets have been able to go toe-to-toe. And then the one game at the end of the road trip, the Jets were quite dominant the other way against them as well. So, again, let's see how things go from there. Edmonton is 4-2. There's no doubt about that. One of those games, Draisaitl scored with 0.7 seconds left. So I don't think that, and I would also say those 2 games against Edmonton, at least one of them, the shots against were 22. So McDavid took over the game? Yes. The Jets did not get dominated by Edmonton. But do the Jets need to do a better job against teams with speed in terms of generating offense? Absolutely. Let's see how these next couple games go against Montreal.
I really do think that's the key there. I think that, and it's funny, Paul Maurice has talked about that, and I think for years that's why he's always been so worried about Montreal, because they're a team that really brings that speed element, and it really does seem to be what the Jets struggle with most. All right, we're going to bring in a guy who usually is busy lobbing bombs at us from the comments section, and him and Kenny were lobbing bombs at each other today, so much to the point that we just thought we need to bring him in and settle this on Kenny and Renny. So here it's turning into Kenny, Renny, and Billeck here tonight. As Scotty Billeck is going to join us for the first time on Kenny and Renny. How are you doing, Scotty?
I'm doing good. I brought you a pillow when me and Kenny go late here, so you can fall asleep.
You're going to do one of those, eh?
I'm
like
gonna do one
Jeff
of those,
Hamilton. For those who haven't, who don't know what he's talking about, it was like almost 2 a.m, and I tried to tap out like 3 times, and the audience just wanted to keep going, and Kenny and Hammy wanted to keep going, and some of us need our beauty sleep. It may not be working, but that's why we go for it. But Scotty, welcome to the show. It's good to have you.
What's going on?
Give me your Hang on one second before you go in. Okay. No music, Scotty, but here this is as close to the intro music as you can get.
Yeah, I didn't want to do it, so copyright and all that stuff. I didn't want to do it just in case you guys get banned or something.
You could have had it playing in the background. Scotty, I go and I do a hit on 92 every Thursday, and they play that song for my intro, and I feel terrible about it because I have nothing to do with it. I don't know why they landed on that song, but I was like, that's Billeck's entrance music, right? Like it's like using Hogan's music to walk out. You don't do that. You don't do that stuff, right? But Scotty, give us your take on the game. Is that the kind of game that you walk away from and think they were dominant at the beginning, built themselves up a lead, they can do whatever they want in the third period, or are you concerned by how that one went down the stretch?
No, I listened to Paul Maurice after the game talk about how he felt his team kind of played. I think there's a time in that third period where they need to, stem the tide a little bit. I find this team, when it does start bleeding a little bit, the cut can come a little bigger, but they figure out a way. So I don't think that's. No, they played a great game. I don't want to take anything away from those first two periods, and for some of the third, and when it became 4-3. when it became 4-3, the Jets still were able to do it. They managed it. I didn't feel there was any panic there on the ice. We might have felt it kind of up in the press box, especially guys working on. I didn't bring the mustard. That's for the legal curve, guys. I'm not bringing the mustard. But no, I think the Jets played well, very well. I think that the way that they came out in that game was exactly how they needed to come out. You have to beat teams like Ottawa, and they did it. It got a little hairy in the third, but they managed to hold on to it. It wasn't a heartbreaking ending. They didn't give up the game-tying goal. It didn't go to overtime. They did what they needed to do. So, that's the game that you wanted, other than, that kind of resurgence a little bit in the third when maybe they let off the gas tank or the gas pedal a little bit there.
So, Scotty, just so you know, my job on this show is to try and stumble you guys with the viewer comments and bring them up. And I take great pride in it. It takes a little bit to get Kenny off his game. It doesn't happen very often, but you do it quite often in the press box. I know there's some scraps. It goes back and forth. I think sometimes because Kenny and I got a little thing going, I feel like I should get in there. But the heat between you two, sometimes I don't want any part of it. I want out of that.
You'll get burned, man. You'll get burned.
Exactly. So I'm hoping we get a little bit of that heat here tonight. One of the things that I think
hang on a second here. Sorry, I know you're the host here. This is something that Scott would like to weigh in on because we were talking about it in the press box.
Let's do it.
It's Stanley's passing, the one that I'm seeing there. 100%. I think it's not just I think the passing's always there. I think he's looking for it more. I think it's not just shot first for him, that kind of mentality that he's had kind of in the past. I think now it's. I'll go back to the last Toronto game, the 2-1 loss in the shootout, and he looks for Blake Wheeler in the high tip or the high slot for the dip. And I like that from him because it just, to me, we've all watched this. This is a progression of a player that nobody thought would ever really make it to where he is. And now he's
not nobody.
Well, maybe not nobody, but there was a lot of us, including some of us in the media, who just what were the Jets even thinking? And now you got some of these comments, 64 moves their puck really well. I mean, all this stuff. These are things a lot of people, not all, not Kenny, not the great one here, but I think that there was, he's progressed right in front of us. We watched it all this season. I'm just waiting for the chance where he gets a top 4 chance, maybe with just Neil Pionk, just see what it looks like, and give me a look. I just want to see. Here's a guy who's so responsible defensively, and even when he's beat, I remember the game was, but when he was beat one time, he basically dove. This was a couple weeks ago now. Uses his stick, dives, and then is able to still. He's not out of the play. This guy's never out of the play, and I think that's. I don't know. There's just something with him. And I know we're talking about the passing, but defensively, offensively, I mean, guys think that I'm being a little homer when it comes to this, but I've watched a player kind of mature so quickly and never really makes that mistake twice. And I think the same mistake twice, and I think. He there's some vindication for him, I think. I talked to this guy a couple times throughout the years doing preseason stories for the NHL, and I did one, I think, for NBC. And then I did one, for the Sun when I took over for Kenny last year. And every year he was like, I know what people are saying about me. He basically, but he just, he kept it within himself and went out and did what he had to do, dealt with injuries. And when he got a shot in the NHL this year, he took it. And when he didn't, that's the other thing. When it was taken away from him, and I don't, that's maybe a strong word, but when it was taken from him, he didn't go and sulk. He didn't go on the practice squad or the taxi squad and sit there and not do anything. He came and probably improved, which is weird on a taxi squad. But again, we don't know what taxi squads are because this is the first year. But this guy improved in practice and then came out. And I don't think he comes out of the lineup. Who's taking him out of the lineup? I don't know. I mean, even if you bring a guy in, are you taking Logan Stanley out of the lineup right now? I think that's the question. And he's given him a good headache. You know, it's one of those headaches that coaches want to have. But I just think he does so much for this team, even though, and now even a little bit of penalty killing when Josh Morrissey was in the box the other night. I think there's something there. This guy has a lot of tools in the toolbox, I suppose, and he's using them.
So let's get into the debate that I think I heard you guys having earlier on today. Might as well, if this is where we're going with it, because I know you both have strong feelings about this, and if it comes to either Dylan DeMello or Stanley being protected, where do you guys land on that?
You want to go, Kenny?
No, my opinion is I'm Switzerland, so you can start.
Of course, you're pacifist, right? You always tell me. I think I'm of the opinion that the Jets protect Logan Stanley over Dylan DeMello, and I think it's because they put more into him than they have DeMello. I get it. Like, if you lose DeMello, you're losing a very good analytical defenseman. But I think you have to also look at the fact that the Jets are still, like, as good as he is analytically, is Paul Maurice going to play him higher in the lineup? I don't know. And he's got him on the third pairing. I know Paul talks about it being a kind of a mentorship role for Logan, and that's great. But if you're just trying to make Logan better with Dylan DeMello, don't you want to keep Logan Stanley over Dylan DeMello? Like, I don't know what it is. So to me, I think at worst comes worst, they make a deal to make sure that they keep Stanley and DeMello at the same time. But I think if you came down to it, the way that Logan Stanley's played, we're not saying that he's Zdeno Chara yet, but he's better than Tyler Myers, in my opinion. Tyler Myers is, a Calder Trophy winner, but his career hasn't panned out in the same way. I think people will tell me that there's a ceiling that's already been hit for Logan Stanley. I think that's insane. Like, I mean, he's like 20 some odd games into his NHL career, almost 30 maybe now, into his NHL career, and you're putting a ceiling on a guy that's only gone up. Like, he's going to blow through that ceiling like he has in the other things. So, no, I think Logan Stanley, they've put a lot of work into this guy. They've shown a tremendous amount of faith into him. He was always a project guy. The project is now starting to pan out, and I don't think you expose a guy that you have put tons of development into, when you could expose a guy like Dylan DeMello. Yes, great defenseman. I get that. I understand all of that stuff about Dylan DeMello, and a right shot or right-handed, defenseman on the thing where you're not so well in. But I think if Logan Stanley turns into what he's trending towards, and I know this is a small sample size, I understand that, but if he comes close to a guy like Chara, if he even is a notch below Chara, I think you want that at his age, at 22, for the next, X number of years, rather than you want Dylan DeMello. I think then they can use assets that they have in their prospect pool to go out and get a right shot defenseman. I just don't think I don't think that they're not going to loosen the grip that they have on Logan Stanley now after he's been playing so well. I just don't see it. That's not how this team, this GM, this organization kind of works with their homegrown kind of, the guys that they've grown out back in the garden. They don't go and sell those guys off unless they have to, So
that's a good one. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, but I mean, that's what that's my take on it. I know, Kenny, a little bit of a different take, so you can talk about it. But
I wouldn't say it's all that different. I just think that there are a lot of things to consider, and with what you're saying, absolutely correct. Stanley has come a long way. There's a lot invested in the player, and I agree. I think the ceiling is higher. For all the people saying that because of any perceived deficiencies in Stanley's game that he won't become any better than he already is. I don't think that that's the case either. Here's a guy that, again, Paul Maurice, this sounds like it's a specific skill, but for having the 6'7" guy have the ability to clear the zone on a penalty kill, that's not something that is that seen on that many levels. I mean, Dylan DeMello is a very good player. He's a very smart player. He's a very efficient player. He's a very effective player. But back to your point, Dylan DeMello making $3 million, if he's on the first pairing, $3 million is a great bargain on the top pairing. If you're making $3 million on the third pairing, well, for a team like the Jets who are trying to sign Adam Lowry, Andrew Kopp, potentially Paul Stastny, and probably giving Neil Pionk a raise to $6 million, well, now you have to give that some consideration as well. Again, what Logan Stanley is going to be, we don't know that yet. Logan Stanley doesn't know that yet. The Jets don't know that yet. The media doesn't know it, and neither do the fans who think that they have a picture of what he's going to look like in 3 years' time. So I see there being a possibility to have both players stay in the organization, but if it comes down to dollars and cents, I do see a possibility that DeMello could be the guy that could be the odd man out. However, we know how the Jets managed the last situation with Vegas in terms of making a side deal. I will not be surprised one bit if there's a side deal made in this situation. I think they're both, where I'm Switzerland is, they're both worth keeping for very different reasons. Yeah. Having said that, based on where the Jets are financially, it wouldn't surprise me if DeMello had to be the guy that was exposed. The one thing I'm very curious about, dating back to Vegas, both of you, Vegas took so many defensemen thinking that the glut of defensemen would be something they could turn into additional assets. Now, they were able to do that to a certain degree, but not with everybody. So how will Seattle view these things? I mean, is Seattle looking for more projects? Is Seattle looking to try to make the Cup final in the first year like Vegas did? Can they catch lightning in a bottle? I mean, they've put together a very smart management group. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of players they're interested in under Ron Francis and company there.
All right, a couple things on all this. First of all, Scott saying that he's just a step below Chara. That's crazy.
No,
that's
I'm
insane.
saying if he gets a step below
even
Chara.
Projecting. I mean, Chara is he's a defenseman of a generation. We can't just say because he's 6'7" and another guy's 6'8". We just can't put them in the same boat. There's two very different things.
There's like three of them in the league.
Well, that's my point. And how many of them are like Chara?
Well, I mean, fair enough. That's a good point. But I mean, Tyler Myers, again, you would have gone back to 2000 and whatever year it was that he won the Calder Trophy, and people are talking about Tyler Myers being the next Chara. I'm kind of defeating my own point here, but I'm saying that, I mean, do you not take a chance on that over a run of the mill? And I'm going to get
don't say run Twitter. Of the don't say run of the mill.
Yeah. Dylan DeMello, you were talking about Mike Riley earlier. I mean, Mike Riley has been this analytical darling. Well, could you not just get, would he not be the same as Dylan DeMello in terms of that analytics, great on defense, that sort of thing? Could you just not get him? I mean,
he's not a right shot D either. He's not a right shot D.
Fair enough.
The Jets are thin on the right side. That is something that we can't ignore.
I understand that, but do you not take a chance on having a Chara over, potentially having a guy in that realm? Do you not take that chance instead of, just a guy like DeMello? And I'm not trying to minimize what DeMello does, because he does a lot of good things. I'm just saying you can replicate that, I think, more than you can a guy like, because you can't teach 6'7". You just can't do it. And
yeah, a lot of people saying that. Yeah,
I just don't know. Do you give up on it at this point when you're just starting to see him kind of bud? I guess, and that's a bad pun. But yeah,
I don't buy into the, because a guy is tall, he's going to be Chara. Chara is a really special player for a lot of different reasons. And so I mean, I don't automatically fall to that. I think he's got great reach. I think he's got, his ability to get the puck through. I don't see them as being the same kind of player, though. That said, Scotty, I entirely agree with you that I think that they are going to protect Stanley over DeMello. And for me, it's team control, because it's one of the things that the Winnipeg Jets love in players is years of team control. And they've got a lot of that over Logan Stanley, and Kenny touched on the financial side of this. The ability that they have to, like they have with Adam Lowry, like they have with Andrew Kopp, to kind of control and depress the salaries that those players get is a massive tool, especially in the age that we're finding. But I do wonder if DeMello does go, and I know you're saying that you can just go get another DeMello, and I think on different teams you could really go get another DeMello type player. But you had to see with the Winnipeg Jets, they had to make overtures towards Dylan DeMello to get him to come here, and they had to, convince him to stay and find a situation for him to go to be in where he was comfortable and sign. And he's really one of the few guys that the Jets have been able to say, look, we want you to stick around and sign a contract extension. And they did. He's one of the guys they sold him on. I wonder what turning around and leaving that guy who signed here because he wanted to be here. So he said he wanted stability in his career, and that's why he came here, exposing that player and allowing him to leave. I wonder what message that sends to the rest of those players that the Jets are going to have to go now to try and get to replace that player.
Right, and the one other thing, hang on one sec. Toby Enstrom is another great example here, guys, right? So Toby signed. So Toby was one of the first players to commit long term. But they still did ask him at the end, so that we can't ignore that part of it either. I think that the loyalty is a big part of their brand. I do think it is a consideration, but I think they'll have to weigh all of the factors before we can declare one way or another. But I do think it's part of the consideration process.
The other thing that I wanted to say, the whole side deal thing. I think Vegas knew that, like, if we take a look at it, and Kenny, you and I have gone back and forth on this, the idea of a side deal and the Jets striking a side deal, I hate the idea. And the reason I hate the idea is we think that the side deal isn't such a big deal because of how it played out and how the Jets lost Chris Thorburn, right? I think people, I don't know, 60% of Jets fans know that the pick that they sent ended up being Suzuki, who's a phenomenal player and probably could have been helpful for this team for a number of years. But I do think compared to other teams with their side deal, the Jets got off the hook a little bit, but I think they got off the hook because the only player that you were really going to take off that Jets roster was Toby Enstrom. And I think there was an understanding around the league that you only were going to have him for 1 year, and was it really worth going to pluck him off the Jets roster for that 1 year when you were going to lose him after that, when you could get a first round pick in that, I guess it was 12 they got it at, in that range.
13, yeah.
And 13. And Thorburn, who really, clearly they nothing against Chris, but they had no interest in keeping him there because they didn't keep him there. But
they also got a draft pick as well, I think third or fourth rounder as well as part of that deal.
Correct. But I wonder if the side deal, let's dive into this. Do you think the side deal is going, now that we saw how badly Vegas torched other teams, do you think the side deal is going to be harder to come by? And if it is harder to come by, do you think that means that Seattle is going to be asking for more inside deals or less than what Vegas was asking for? What's the market going to be for the side deal based on what we're seeing leading into the expansion draft?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question because, I think that you're now dealing with a flat cap, at least for a little bit. I assume Seattle's not a team that's too worried about money at this point when you're coming into the NHL, so you don't have to worry about that too much. They'll go to the cap maybe if they can. And it's a good question. I don't know. I think the idea for the Jets, at least putting up DeMello, would be if they do take him, that money can start going towards like an Andrew Kopp or an Adam Lowry. Like, somebody's getting lost this year, and you're probably losing a couple guys, right? So I think you got to do what's best for your team, and if that means selling a pick or whatever it is, like the Jets did the last time, to figure it out, then that's what you do. It depends where you think you are. If the Jets think that the window is there and DeMello and Stanley are part of that window, well, then I think you spend now, just like the same way that you would spend to go and get a Matthias Ekholm or a David Savard or whoever it might be. Do you not look at it kind of in that way? Like, if you want to keep a certain player and there is a price to pay, you want to go get a certain player and there's a price to pay. Do you not pay that price if you have the assets to do it and you think that your team has the best, chance of being a competitive, a Stanley Cup contender going forward? Do you not just pay the same price as you would at a trade deadline or something along those lines? Like, if Seattle does up the price, I mean, we'll see what the market is. There's going to be a lot of good players available. That's kind of the deal with the expansion draft. But I don't know. I mean, do you view it as a kind of a trade deadline sort of thing where you have to pay something to keep what you want or get what you want? In this case, keeping what you have. I guess that's the question that I would raise on top of your question, because I just don't know what Seattle, the price. We won't know what the price is until we get to that point, closer to that draft or what it's going to take. But yeah, I think it's, do you view it in the same way as you would kind of a trade deadline? Easy for me to say. But yeah, I think that's kind of how you kind of view that.
Yeah.
Go on, Ken.
Yeah, I mean, just the one thing that the market is so interesting. We won't know what the leverage points are. We don't know what the leverage points are for free agents going into free agency. The thought was that with the cap that was probably approaching 86 to 88 million, a team like Seattle could be a massive disruptor because they're not tied to any of these big ticket contracts. And I mean, you look at some of the, suggestions about the expansion draft. Well, why don't they just take PK Subban and 10 million? Well, Seattle's not here to do anybody any favors.
Exactly.
And here's the other part that we're talking about the D, but we have to also look at the forwards when we talk about the Jets' budget. They have Mason Appleton, who is now developed into a very good third-line player who might be able to eventually jump up into the top 6. The Jets don't want to lose Mason Appleton. They've got him locked in for $1 million or whatever it is for next year. So I see him being protected, but now, too, if you protect Appleton, now you're running the risk of what's going to happen with Adam Lowry. I mean, the trickle-down effect is incredibly high, and then when it comes to protecting other players, that will also be dependent to a degree on what happens in the trade deadline.
Yeah.
If the Jets are spending a first-round pick to get someone to play in the top 4, well, now you're not giving another first-round pick for 2021 or 2022 to protect a player. That just doesn't seem to be a likely scenario. They're going to lose a good player. They have backfill in terms of forward depth. Can the Jets convince Seattle to take Christian Vesalainen? I mean, I don't know, but I mean, there are other assets that will be under consideration just based on where the Jets are. But again, they probably aren't going to want to overcomplicate things. You're going to lose one good player if you're the Jets. Be very careful about losing 2 or 3 assets.
Yeah. I do think that I've brought this up. John Shannon, I did CJOB pregame with him a couple of weeks ago, and he'd said in talking with a lot of the general managers that they'd lost sight of the fact that it's just one player. You're losing just one player. And a lot of these teams ended up losing 2 players who were better than the one player that they were trying to protect. Sometimes it's just about taking your medicine. Scott, on this show you've been watching, some of the things I like to do is throw out like a wild theory of mine and let Kenny chew on that. And I'm going to do it with you here as well, because you brought up the whole window. I had this thought earlier today, and part of this, when we're protecting these players and we're having these conversations, a lot of it has to do with Adam Lowry not being in the picture and being a UFA that the Jets are going to try and maneuver and sign back, right? And I can see why people feel that's a possibility. His dad's here in town. I don't think that's a fluke. I think that's a move by the organization to try and create a home feeling here. I'm not discounting what Dave does for the team. I think he's been phenomenal for the team, but I think it's one of those win-win situations. I think personally, if you mess around and you don't re-sign him and you let him go to free agent, unrestricted free agency, and he's gone, I think your window closes. Because I think Adam Lowry is so important to this team, and Blake Wheeler touched on it the other day, what he does as far as being able to take him out and put him out against the best players any team in the league has to put out there. His ability to shut down those players creates such mismatch opportunities for the Jets that I really do think it's created a lot of the offense that we've come to know the Jets for.
So
I mean, I suggest that
Kenny disagrees.
this team entirely changes if you lose
Yes.
Adam Lowry, and I don't know that it's a loss that they can overcome because I don't know that there's players out there that you can go to replace Adam Lowry. I know David Gustafsson, people are excited about him, but does he step in and do what Adam Lowry has been doing since 2015 in the playoffs for this team?
And I so me and Kenny kind of we touched on this a little bit in the press box today, because we were talking a little bit about, I think you're right. The reason I think you're right is whether or not David Gustafsson can play that role, that's great. If he can, perfect. Can he do it as effectively as a veteran Adam Lowry can? I don't think so, and not right away. And so he might mold into that in 2 or 3 years' time, playing full-time NHL. But let's not remember, Adam Lowry and even Andrew Kopp. Andrew Kopp's a special player. I believe that wholeheartedly, because as Paul Maurice said many times, you've only had to teach him offense. You haven't had to teach him defense. And I think that's the same thing with Adam Lowry. And I think you'll get that with David Gustafsson as well. But I just don't know if that. I don't think he can be as effective right away with the size, with all the intangibles that he has, that sort of. But I don't think. I don't think you can replace, like you said. I don't think you can replace an Adam Lowry that way. I think the best move for the Jets, if they want to re-sign Adam Lowry, is work out some weird deal where they already know that he's going to resign. Let him go to UFA, sign him after that. Just knowing, this underhand or under the table kind of, handshake type of deal. Because I think you want to keep Adam Lowry, and I agree. I think bringing Dave Lowry in, there's a lot of coaches that you might have been able to bring. I don't know, maybe not Gerard Gallant. I don't know. He probably cost too much, but I think. Yeah, you bring in Dave Lowry to try and entice to keep his kid around. I think there's a lot of maneuvering here that you do. You can. Well, I didn't see that one, but I tease him. Yeah, I think. Yeah, I agree with Sean. I think Adam Lowry is a catalyst on this team. I think he drives a line that is so integral to this team defensively. You get rid of that, and now you need the top six to play better defense, and it might get there, but when? Tell me when the top six are going to start playing better defense. Is it with Pierre-Luc Dubois? Maybe. Blake Wheeler's getting older. Mark Scheifele, Kyle Connor, Nikolai Ehlers, are they going to play better defense? I don't know. So you really do need that third line, and that's why I think. Part of it, you lose DeMello, well, that money gets freed up then to buy, to pay for the new contracts of a Kyle or Andrew Kopp and Adam Lowry. So yeah, I struggle, as you do, I think, with thinking that this team is more competitive or is equally as competitive as they are now, without a guy like Adam Lowry and without also a guy like Andrew Kopp. And the reality might be is you have to, not have to, but you might lose one of them. And so you better have a good backup plan. And maybe, I don't know if David Gustafsson, in the games that he's played this year, he was solid. This guy's in all the right positions, all that kind of stuff. Good player. Is he Adam Lowry? I just don't know. And Raymond's saying here about playoff beasts, yeah, we've seen that. These two, you put them up. They'll play against the Matthews line. They'll play against the McDavid line. You might not need that going forward because you're probably going back to the Central Division next year and that sort of. But you're still going to need it. There's still
you'll need that in the Central Division. You need that in the Central Division.
That's what I mean, right? So you need to try to find a way to keep a hold of those two, and that's going to take some finagling as well. But yeah, I agree with you. To answer your question, yes, I'm with you. I think that the window. I don't know if the window closes completely, but it closes for a couple of years because you got to wait till David Gustafsson gets up to that level or reasonable facsimile.
The Jets need to sign Adam Lowry before there will be no side deal. They need to sign him before the season is over. If they want to ensure the window in what we're talking about here, Adam Lowry needs to be signed. He has all the leverage, but he needs to be signed. Yes, I am a fan of David Gustafsson's game. I think eventually he can grow into that type of player. I think David Gustafsson is ready to play in the NHL right now, but I also think he's better served by playing top-line minutes with the Moose and being a point-a-game player at that level so that when he arrives in the NHL, he can play. But I'm here to tell you right now, if Nate Thompson would get injured in the Stanley Cup playoffs, I think Gustafsson could fill the role rather effectively. Sure. So for me, I think the Jets need to sign Kopp and Lowry both. Can they do that? That is a bigger question. But for me, the Jets are better, and not just better as a hockey team, in terms of the culture they're building, all of those things. Those two guys are part of the leadership core. They're not just an important line. They're an important part of this second wave of leaders. And would they be guys that could wear letters if they're going to be here for the long term?
Andrew Kopp could be the next captain of this team. And I don't say that lightly either. Like, I mean, he's not the top line center guy that's going to do it. But man, like this guy, this guy exudes everything you want out of, like, he is Blake Wheeler 2.0 in the way that he approaches the game, approaches his body, approaches his practices, all that stuff. I mean, this is the guy you want as your next captain. Now, I don't know if he would get that C, but he's for sure an A somewhere down the line here. Whether that is once, Blake Wheeler's done his career. But yeah, I agree. I mean, I know Sean wanted to say something, so I mean.
Well, I'm just going to say, I'm hearing from you guys, leadership, playoff style players, offensive upside on both of them, great in the room. So what do you got to pay these guys? I mean, if you're going to keep these guys, aren't we at the stage with what you've got invested up front in your talent? Aren't we at the stage where if you're keeping these guys, you're essentially deciding to build your defense core without money, essentially trying to do what you're doing right now with Derek Forbert, slipping a guy in who you feel can play a very specific style game and you can pay him closer to the league minimum. Aren't you, if you decide to go forward with these two players, if you decide to get Andrew Kopp locked down, get the extension now so you don't risk him going to unrestricted free agency, and if you lock up Adam Lowry now, which I'm going on record now, I think you have to do it. I don't think you can play that game that we're talking about. I think you have to sign him and get him locked down because there's too many teams who look at him and think how much better he could make their team. If you're committing to those guys, I don't know that there's money left to build your defense core financially. So at one point, what are we talking about? Are we going to lose a player like Nick Ehlers or Kyle Connor down the road to try and make space for those kind of players to keep that element? Or is that an element that you think, as valuable as it is, maybe you take a little bit off that, bring in a guy like David Gustafsson, build a very strong defensive team in that manner, but you don't have these two behemoths who've really, I think, shaped the way this team has played for 5-6 years?
Yeah, for me, this goes back to the prospect pool on the back end, Sean. I mean, the one thing we know is that the Jets have Ville Heinola, they have Dylan Sandberg, and they have an emerging Logan Stanley. All three of those guys will be on entry-level contracts next year, but it will require the trust of the coaching staff in order to play all three of them because they're going to be ready to play. But that also means now you have three very young players on the back end, and you want to surround them with Neil Pionk, you want to surround them with Josh Morrissey, and then now we're not sure about Dylan DeMello. I mean, he's under contract, so let's say right now that you want DeMello there, but now you're not sure if you can afford that $3 million. I mean, here's the thing. I tell Scott this all the time. You can't pay every player $5 million. So if you choose to go 4.5 with Lowry and Kopp, now you have no choice but to either find a $1 million defenseman who's a veteran or turn it over to the young players. I think the one thing the Jets know is that they've already found out that Stanley is probably a little bit ahead of his progress because I think they weren't expecting him to become a regular until next season. Yeah. And now, the thing that we've talked about all the time, and I know that fans are impatient, the reason that Sandberg and Heinola are playing 20-plus minutes a game normally, I know that Heinola is on the taxi squad right now, but the reason those guys are playing is because they're going to be needed in the Jets lineup next season, and better for them to be playing 20 minutes in the minors than playing 8 to 12 minutes at the NHL level, even if they might be able to do more than just tread water at this moment.
Yeah, is there a reason? Hold on. Is there a reason to believe that this window that we're talking about, if you make those moves to keep those two players in the fold, is there reason to believe from what we've seen from this defense core as it exists right now, that adding a couple of young prospects like Sandberg and Heinola, if they hit, that it's the kind of defense core that, despite being that young and that inexperienced, could lead you on a long playoff run?
Scott, Sean, we just watched Dallas.
Yeah.
Dallas has Heiskanen, and Lindell's still pretty young.
Yeah,
I'm not saying that he's there. Yes, I understand that.
Different beast.
I totally understand, but I think Heinola has been described as kind of Heiskanen light. He doesn't skate the same way, but if he can move the puck in terms of his efficiency with the exits, which is something that the Jets have occasionally had trouble with, now that's a big difference. I mean, I just watched Dylan Sandberg last week. This guy is a big, strong, mobile guy. He is a future Matthias Ekholm type of player, or that's how he's projected to be. Maybe not as offensive, but the other part to remember, these guys are young, yes, but Sandberg spent 3 years in college. Now he's going to have a full year in the minors. Is he still young? Is he still going to make some mistakes? Yes, but I think that the Jets defense core goes from question mark to potential strength quite quickly if the development curve continues for all three young players. But again, you have to trust those players and you got to hand them the keys. We always have this conversation and debate. Are you ready to give them the keys? The Jets may not have much of a choice, but I think that they'd be a lot more comfortable handing over the keys at the start of next season based on what we're learning about these players this season.
So, Scott, I'm going to ask you this. Based on what we've learned from Paul Maurice this year, which is that in the years past, he felt that youth hurt this team at different stages, and he's clearly gone all in on veteran leadership. Do we feel that Paul Maurice is in a place where he's okay with the idea of turning over the defense core and handing over essentially half of that unit? If you're going to go with Stanley, Sandberg, and Heinola, half your unit is essentially going to be learning on the fly.
But isn't that what's happening kind of right now, though? I mean, I know you have Josh Morrissey, but Neil Pionk's a young guy. This is only
he's not that
year.
Young. He's not that young.
In his NHL career, this is only his third season, is it not?
Sure,
right?
sure, but you're building upon. I mean, we're watching a progression, a 3-year progression, right? So I agree with you, and I'm saying that those players could do that, go along that Pionk that road. But that's 3 years.
I'm just saying the defense is young. Like, I mean, even if you look at it, I think Paul Maurice likes his forwards to be older, a little older. I'm not so sure his defensive needs to be the same way. And I think if you can bring in a guy like Logan, hold on, I think I see those fit. I think if you can bring in a guy like Logan Stanley, who's opened the eyes of Paul Maurice in my mind, and if Dylan Sandberg comes in and does the same thing, and they've already seen what Ville Heinola can do, I don't know if there's that much apprehension there as there would be if it was just, I don't know, Christian Vesalainen and whoever else on the forward, like David Gustafsson, because you're grooming these guys. They groom their defensemen well. I mean, in my opinion, they groom their defensemen well. They've done it with Morrissey. They've done it with some other guys. They obviously did it well with Trouba. Trouba came right in, but they've done it well before. I think they have the defensemen, like Kenny kind of said. These guys are coming up. You can put in a guy. You can pluck a Forbert or whoever else off the UFA list and make it work. I don't know. Has the Jets' defense not gotten better as this season has gone on? Like, I mean, to me, I think their defense has gotten better as it's gone on. It is still a sore spot at times, but the 5-man unit hasn't been hindered as much by the guys on the back end, in my opinion, as it has with maybe some of the guys up front. And
so here, I'll just weigh in on that. I think what we're seeing is this 5-man system that Paul Maurice has, and it's not like he's created the wheel here, right? Like, no, he hasn't invented the wheel. This is something they're going with. But I do think that the team defense that they have to play, I don't think it and I've said this with Ken, I don't think it necessarily frees the type of offensive play that you would potentially like to see for players like Ehlers and Connor and Scheifele and to a degree Blake Wheeler. And that's why I've thought personally, I think they need to swing for the fences and go out and try to get a Matthias Ekholm, because I think you need the kind of player back there who can, bust out, get you out of the jams, those kind of defensemen that you can just go out and know that nothing's going to happen back there and free those guys up. And I guess that would be that's my personal opinion. I'm not saying that it's right, but if I'm coming at it looking from this, I think going into next year with a young defense core, you're still a couple of years away from handing that ability over to them to free everyone up front, and you're still locked into that idea of playing defense first and not freeing yourself up offensively, because you need to help those guys.
But you're also saying too at the same time that Adam Lowry needs to be on this team next year for the window not to close. Well, what are you going to do? I mean, I don't know how. So how do you keep Adam Lowry and bring Matthias Ekholm in and pay for his last year, and still keep Lowry and Kopp on your team? I don't know.
Well, I don't think you can. That's what I'm saying. I don't think you can keep Lowry and Kopp. I think you have to choose between one or the other.
Well, maybe. I don't need. Maybe not. Do you need Ekholm? Is Ekholm? What is the difference between Ekholm and a Savard right now? How big of a difference is that in terms of?
I think it's a big difference.
Huge difference, like Stanley Cup winning defense, difference.
Well, you know what? That's a good question. I guess I put it this way. I just see that the opportunity that exists for the Jets, you have to put your best foot forward. So you have to get the best guy that you possibly can. A guy who's big, strong like that, can log a lot of minutes and can play, essentially, for first pairing time. And you go and look at any successful playoff team, they've got that one D-man who can log 27 minutes a night, and I think Matthias Ekholm is that guy. Well, I think Savard can do that. I don't think he can do it as well.
Are we really discounting Neil Pionk that much?
I'm not discounting him,
but he's the team's MVP this year, if not Connor Hellebuck. He's the team's MVP this year on defense. On
defense, I don't know if I'd agree on the team.
Well, who else would be?
We're going down a rabbit.
Hang on, go out and get Josh Manson. This is another one of my drums here. Big, strong, mobile, and you have him for one more year. If you're the Jets, depending on what happens with expansion, $4.1 million, is it too big a ticket? I don't know. If he plays top 4 minutes, 4.1 is not too big a ticket, but that would be a guy that, again, you got to keep your eyes on. In terms of Savard, I think he would bring some certain qualities for sure. Big and strong guy, pretty efficient puck mover also. Again, because he's a pending UFA, I think the Jets would maybe look at him in that Drew Stafford scenario that you and I have talked about, Scott. A guy that the Jets would bring in, potentially sign him after seeing what happens with expansion.
How about just get Ekholm and then expose him? Would that be? Is that here? I'll throw one.
You'd be giving up too much to get him.
Yeah.
Based on what the asking price is. And the other part too, Scotty, just one quick second. Because you would be getting Ekholm at 3.75 if you were the Jets. Yes, his salary is $5 million, but again, what we just said, if Manson at 4.1 is reasonable for a top 4 guy, if they can get Ekholm for that year, of course, it's a reasonable price. But again, Ekholm is off the market for all intents and purposes. Ekholm is not going to be given unless, what was being reported, they want the Predators one Hanel. That's not happening.
Well, that's
for a year and a half of Ekholm. No. So that's why I say
that's where the ask starts, though. It's not going to stay there. It's going to go down from there. Of course, they're going to ask for the best prospect.
It's a big time steering. He's not in any. David Poile is in the driver's seat here. His team is in a playoff spot. He doesn't have to move Ekholm.
Do you not just? Yeah. If the asking price is that high and the Jets don't beat it, does Toronto just swoop in and give Nate Thompson up or whatever? Well, I think is it Nate Thompson? Is that
Nate Robertson?
Nate Robertson. That's it.
Robertson is a first.
Just scoop right in there because they're willing to get rid of that guy. If you look at any of these trade boards, that Toronto's top prospect, which is Nate Robertson,
Nick,
is the guy that's up in the top 10 of guys that's available during the trade deadline.
Yeah.
Right? Right around, so if I'm Toronto and the Jets aren't paying the price, then I'm paying the price. Because if I'm Kyle Dubas,
Toronto is definitely interested. They're interested. But again, I think, Nashville has changed their scenario. They don't have a lot of pending unrestricted free agents Listening to 31 Thoughts today, Chris Johnson was on with Jeff Merrick and Elliott. They think that Poyle is a guy who's not afraid to take a swing. They're not saying he's going to go out and buy, but they're not in a place that they're not in tear down mode. If it doesn't work out for Nashville this year, they still have some important pieces that, I mean, they got Roman Josi. They've got a lot of players they think they can build around, but the problem is right now their mix is not working. So, yes, indeed, Rick, Manson does have a limited no movement clause. It's 12 teams. Could the Jets be on it? Sure. I mean, there are players that have Winnipeg on it. But again, Paul Stastny waived to come to Winnipeg. Would Josh Manson consider it? I think that if Josh Manson wants to play, if he sees the Jets as a contender, I think he would definitely consider it.
What about Vince Dunn now? Vince Dunn. St.
Well,
Louis.
especially the way that St. Louis is trending.
What about him?
I mean, again, he's affordable. He's an RFA on a pretty reasonable contract. His point totals aren't that high, so his next contract is probably reasonable. But as we talked about upstairs, I mean, Vince Dunn's another left shot D. I mean, yes, Ekholm is as well. I think the Blues...
But maybe use a left shot D prospect to go get your right-handed defenseman.
Yeah, and as mentioned by a couple of our commenters, Declan Chisholm is another guy I've watched recently. He's an incredibly gifted skater. He's improved his defensive play. So there's another guy a couple of years down the road probably for Winnipeg in terms of their left shot D prospects. But I think that they're going to go out and get somebody. Who they're going to get, that's the other thing that the CJ and Elliot and Jeff are talking about. The belief around the league. We all thought in the media that, I think we pretty much get sucked in every year. This is going to be the year where there are going to be 5 preemptive strikes. Right. All these deals are going to get made in the weeks leading up to the deadline. Now all of a sudden we find ourselves a week away from the deadline.
Well, I think that changed a little bit with the COVID restriction changing, though.
Well, it certainly helps.
I mean, I think that was a big deal this year. That's 7 days. Yep. But you're right. I mean, every year, like you said, is the one every team's going to shoot their shot early, and you know, it never happens, right?
The Penguins did it a few times for sure. Jim Rutherford is one of the classics. He goes out and gets somebody early on. But I mean, let's see what happens.
He's aggressive.
Alexiak, I've mentioned as well. Whoever mentioned it in the line there. But Dallas is also in the playoff mix as well, so I don't see him being available.
Can I switch gears here, guys? Can we move to something else? I wanted to touch on this because we ended on our Sportsnet hit on this, Ken. So Jets doing a great job against teams like Ottawa. They win, they're 5-1 against them so far this season in 6 games. I went back to March 1st, and their record against teams in the playoffs, so their record against Montreal, Toronto, and Edmonton since March 1st is 4-5-2. They've only won 4 of 11 games against those teams. One of those games they win one of those wins and one of those overtime losses are 2 games against Toronto that they absolutely got worked, but found a way to come out with points because they goalied them, right? Yeah. How are we feeling, especially on a night like this when you're playing against, the worst team in the division who kind of pushes back and almost fights their way back into the game? How are we feeling about the Jets and their ability to compete against the top teams as of late?
Well, we've already seen it, though. I get what you're saying, and I understand that. And I'm kind of switching what I said earlier because me and Kenny kind of talked about this a little bit as well. But, just because, I hate admitting it, but, Paul Maurice is a little bit right in terms of, the Senators are, he said, the reason why they're 5-1 against them, and he kind of says this almost arrogantly because he kind of gives them respect, right? And so, that's why the Jets have taken care of business against the Senators. I think they've held their own against Toronto. I know that those 2 games are horrible. I said that the Leafs dominated them. I got emails from people telling me I'm an idiot, and that's family friendly, because because I said that the Leafs dominated. They did analytically through my eyes, through your eyes, through everybody else's eyes, even through somebody who's blind's eyes. They all knew that the Jets dominated. Or the Leafs dominated them, but the Jets also took it to the Leafs in that 3rd game. They've also done it as well. I thought that they played well. They got goalied in those 2 games. They didn't create the offense, but those were chess matches. The last one was a Grandmaster final chess match. That game was unbelievably good, and I think they can go pound for pound with the Leafs and with the Oilers. You can shut down the Oilers if you shut down the McDavid line. And the Jets have been able to do it. But they have done it, though. Don't say that. They have done it.
For stretches, yes.
For stretches. Yes, if you give up a 2-on-1 late with McDavid and Draisaitl bearing down on you, that's a mistake. But you have to be able to. I mean, any team that's going to win the Stanley Cup has to be able to fix that. And if the Jets can't do that, well, then they're done anyways. But they've gone toe-to-toe with these two teams, and I think they have the best. The Jets have the best goalie in the NHL. Well, okay, I mean, the best goalie in the North Division by far. If Connor Hellebuyck can somehow move an inch more over on that Draisaitl goal, and I think he can, because I don't think he'll get beat again like that. He knows what he did wrong on it, and he. Here's a guy who knows that he has to get that inch over. He'll get. But I think that the Jets have the goalie. Like, that's the X factor in all of this. In the North Division, the Jets have the goalie, and I think Connor Hellebuyck wants nothing more than to win and go back to the Western Final and get through that, because he knows he got outworked by Marc-Andre Fleury. I think that Connor Hellebuyck wants nothing more. And when Connor Hellebuyck wants to do something, we've seen it over and over and over and over again. He goes out and does it. And I just think that's a huge thing in this division. I think that's the X factor, no matter if the Jets finish first or fourth or whatever. I think once they get the playoff time, Connor Hellebuyck's going to shine. And we also know that other guys, Mark Scheifele's, the Adam Lowry's, the Andrew Kopps, the guys like that we've talked about, I mean, that's their time. I don't know if it's different with no fans this year or whatever it's going to end up being, but I don't know. I just think the Jets have such a good goalie. They have, the reigning Vezina winner, but it's more than that. This guy's been Vezina caliber since he got into the league, maybe after that first season. It is what it is. I think they can go toe-to-toe with the Leafs. We've seen it. Ken mentioned it before I get on, 8 points, 6 points, that sort of thing. That's just the way it goes. Kenny is a Scott Billeck. You spelled my name wrong, so this is no. But anyways, that's my take on it. I think Connor Hellebuyck is the X factor in all of this, and I think he covers a multitude of sins for the Jets. I've written that numerous times, and once it gets to the playoff time, I think this team knows. I'm not looking at last year. I think you go back to 2018. Those guys want to do it again. Blake Wheeler and Mark Scheifele especially want to prove that 2018-19 was an outlier, I guess we'll call it, because Blake Wheeler used that term. And last year was it's a global pandemic. I don't put any stock into last year's playoffs.
And the two injuries. I mean, Hellebuyck is the great equalizer. Hellebuyck is the great equalizer. It's just a matter of showing it once again. I mean, we've seen it all year long. We know that Jack Campbell's starting to bring some, solidify the Leafs goaltending situation, but I don't think it's a difficult bet in terms of who most people would be betting on when it comes to playoff time.
Yeah, and this isn't the first goalie the Leafs have had that's played well for a little while and then completely fall off the face of the earth. Jack Campbell doing great right now. Will he do great under the bright lights of the playoffs? Can the Leafs get out of a first round? And there's a lot of things here. There's a ton. I don't think people always notice the pressure that is on the Toronto Maple Leafs to win. That plays a huge part in my mind. The media pressure, the fan pressure. After every game, it's scrutinized ridiculous. There's I guess the water. Who needs water? You got Diet Coke, cherry, caffeine. I'm up all night. No, I think the Leafs have a lot to prove too. If we want to talk about measuring sticks, I got a good argument for that too, because the Jets are their own measuring stick. I don't think the Leafs are the measuring stick in this. I see that look, Sean. The Jets are the measuring stick. Don't tell me. No, there's no, to a man in that dressing room, there is not a player that thinks the Toronto Maple Leafs are the measuring stick.
The Jets are 4-5-2 against the teams above the playoff line. They've won 4 of 7 games against teams above the playoff line since March 1st.
We're cherry picking the last month. I mean, what's the record overall?
Last month, I'm cherry picking the last 5 weeks. I'm cherry picking 5 weeks.
All I'm saying is 4-5-1. Sure, that's whatever. But I mean, it's still
listen. 4-5-1. I agree with you. I agree. And I've made this argument time and time again. I think up front the Jets are the deepest team in the division. I agree with you. Who do I think is the best goalie in Canada? I think it's Connor Hellebuyck. I don't think that they have the best defense core. I think a lot of teams have better defense cores. I think that they need to address that. I do. I think Toronto's got a better defense core. I think of the 4 teams in the playoffs, I think that the Jets have the least effective defense core. But behind Edmonton, behind Toronto, and behind Montreal. So
Edmonton might have the Norris winner this year, but yes, I get what you're saying.
Well, Kenny's been beating that drum. He's been on it. But so this is I had a very public debate with Ryan Leslie at a Calgary last year about exactly what we're talking about in the playoffs last year, and that was my case. They've got Connor Hellebuyck, the great eraser. And that didn't work out too well for me. And if you take a look
at
it,
it didn't work out for you because Mark Scheifele got his ankle sliced open 5 minutes into the game. So I don't think you're wrong on that.
I don't, and I'm not blaming it all on Connor Hellebuyck, but I'm not blaming it all on those injuries either. I mean, take a look at some of the teams that were missing big players in the playoffs last year. I mean, people got to step up. That's how it's got to go. If you've got the deepest, if we're talking about them as being one of the deepest teams in the league, then you should be able to overcome some injuries.
Well, they weren't last year, though. Tampa Bay was without Stamkos, yes, but the Jets didn't have the depth to be able to survive the loss of their 2 of their top 4 forwards.
So you're saying the fourth line would be the difference?
Well, no, for Calgary. I mean, last year Calgary did it with special teams, and they did it with their power play. I mean, their power play was a difference in the series. And yes, Talbot found a way to, again, Hellebuyck didn't play poorly, but he let in he let in more goals than Talbot did, which is something none of us would have anticipated.
The Jets were playing
going into the play. Again, like I just said, Hellebuyck was not blamed. I don't think he let in a lot of bad goals by any stretch, but Talbot did the job for his team. But again, I think that had a lot to do with injuries. I'm reinforcing what you're saying.
Hey,
but
you lost
Sean, you're right.
Cheat code on your power play, right? I mean,
sure.
And then your other cheat code on the power play as well. I mean, you lost your number 1 center and the guy that you feed on the power play all day long. I mean, that's huge in my mind. But yeah,
I just don't think that. I just don't. I mean,
Sean, the Jets couldn't score. I mean, it was no coincidence that they lost 3 forwards and they couldn't score. I mean, that was.
I agree.
That was a huge factor in the playoffs.
I don't subscribe to the idea that the Jets were really plucky in the playoffs last year. I didn't think that I saw a lot of pushback, and I think that I think it's easy to say that you lost those 2 players and you couldn't win with them, and you probably couldn't. But I didn't see this. The suggestion of this massive pushback from that team. I didn't see what the people who suggested that saw.
Well, no, but their best players in that series were Ehlers, Lowry, and Kopp. They didn't get enough from the remaining top 6 guys that were in the lineup.
Right.
Outside of Ehlers, sorry.
Yeah. The Jets were thin last year. I think we have to agree that the Jets were thin last year.
So let's go back to this idea of the pressure of Toronto.
Scotty, you hold on this for a little while.
Yeah, this is where you got that look from him. Ken may have to go for a bathroom.
Kenny's drank too much water. I mean, that's what it is. Have you ever been? I'll tell a story. One quick. I've been on a 45-minute fight with Kenny. He pees. He gets on the plane. He pees. Then during the thing, I see him walking down the aisle, goes to pee mid-flight, and then at the end of the flight, before we land, because you get the little here's the reminder that we're going to land soon. Go pee now. He does it then, and then Sean, for the listeners, because we get out of the terminal, and then he goes to pee, and he's like, "Here, hold my bags for a little bit." Hilarious. It's ridiculous. Anyways, let's talk about.
This is the first time, and I'm telling you, I thought he was like a camel before this, and our viewers will back you up. He usually sits down with like this giant football-sized mug of water and slugs like 2 or 3 of them back. It seems to make it throughout the show. I know Jeff Hamilton had to get up and book for one of our long sessions, but this is the first time for Kenny. Okay, I want to go back and I wanted to ask you this because you brought it up and you'd said the pressure on the Leafs, and I get that. I get that medium market, and yes, it's a step above what it is here. But don't you think that there is pretty solid pressure? I won't say equal, but I don't think it's that far off. Is there not fairly equal pressure for both the Winnipeg Jets and the Edmonton Oilers to have playoff success and get out of the first round this year? And while we're at it, the Montreal Canadiens, who have essentially gone all in this year,
I agree with you, but all three of those teams you're talking about have proven they can get out of the first round. The Leafs haven't gotten out of the first round since 2004. We're coming up on 20 years, Sean, of the Leafs not getting out of the first round. I mean, this is like, I mean, we're not talking, this isn't, Chicago Cubs not winning, but we're over 50 years since they've won a cup, right? Like, I think the pressure in Toronto is immeasurably more than it is in Winnipeg, Edmonton, whatever it is. Because I think Toronto, first of all, it's just, look at that top six in Toronto. Matthews, Tavares, Marner, I mean, Hyman. I mean, this guy's coming. You have...
Don't forget your favorite player.
No, I'm not going to say his name.
Do it. But, let everyone in on it.
But you have all these players. You have so much money tied. You have cap issues up the wazoo. You have all sorts of stuff. You have to worry about LTIR every year to make sure you can fit in. This team is built to try and win now more than they ever have since 2004, and they have to do it, and they haven't done it. They lose every year in the first round. They're not going to have to face the Bruins this year, but it doesn't matter. They face the Columbus Blue Jackets. They lose to them. Beat somebody first and then fine. But the pressure for Toronto to win is huge. I mean, you've worked there, Sean. You've seen it. Kenny, you've seen it. You've been in this business a lot longer than I have. I've watched it on TV, and then long before that, I mean, I watched the Bruins destroy them. It's true. I told them how you get on planes before.
It's okay. I know we saw it in the comments the other day. It's okay.
We talked about you peeing on planes the entire time you were gone.
Well, I mean, it's unbelievable. The bladder control there is none. It's just I gotta go.
Hey, I drink a lot of water, man. I drink a lot of water. You gotta stay hydrated.
I mean, yeah.
I just wonder, Scotty. So I'm gonna.
Sorry, one quick thing, Sean. I don't want to interrupt, but one thing we should mention about the Montreal Canadiens: Brendan Gallagher left today's game. Yeah. Dom Ducharme saying it's a broken thumb. He's had a history of some hand injuries, and that is a massive blow. Again, he's the kind of guy that would probably try to play through it at some point, but he is the heartbeat of the Montreal Canadiens. So, I mean,
he's
that's
the
a
guy
big...
that's torched the Jets.
Exactly.
Right? Like, I mean, he's been that thorn in the side for Winnipeg. So, yeah, anyways.
Come on, people are here for the hockey talk. Let's go.
They're here for the behind the scenes.
It's gone in a direction that we never... You know what? This is why we need to have guests on the show, because they come in and they bring an entirely different action. Now the P audience is in on this. Everyone's loving it. Scotty, the idea of the idea of the Toronto Maple Leafs, I get it, and that mental block that may exist for not getting out of that first round. But don't you think that the disappointment that maybe the Oilers would feel of having the year they had last year, and then getting bounced, not even getting out of the play-in round, don't you think that disappointment would kind of put them in the same boat? And for the Winnipeg Jets, a team that I think everyone walked out of 2018 thinking this is a team that could win 2 cups in the next 3 years, don't you think the disappointments of where they have landed would put them in a similar boat to what we're seeing from Toronto?
I just don't think it's a similar boat, but yes, like I think the pressure is across the board there for all these teams. Montreal, maybe not as much Montreal, because I don't think a lot of people, well, some people did pick Montreal. I think me and you, Sean, picked Montreal not to be in the playoffs this year, if I remember correctly. I don't know.
Yes, but I had an agonizing conversation with Ken. Remember Ken? About I kept saying that if the Montreal Canadiens, I loved everything they did. If it just panned out and certain things happened, I saw them as being a really dangerous team.
I just don't know if the pressure's on Montreal this year as much, because maybe it is now.
I think
there's pressure on Bergevin, though. There's pressure on Bergevin.
Yeah.
Wow, maybe. But I think Toronto is just next level, right? It's next level. Everything a guy does. If Kenny Weeb's bladder was playing in Toronto, can you imagine the pressure on that? He'd be peeing 6 times. But anyways, my point is, I just think the pressure.
What?
This is unbelievable. This is a family program.
Exactly. Come on, clean it up here.
Kenny. Always anyway, but I think the pressure on the Leafs is just. It's built level on level on level. No Stanley Cups in '67. no playoff out of the first round since 2004. It's so much higher than it would be anywhere else. I believe that only because I watch it. I mean, I understand the pressure here is big on this team, but a lot of people didn't even pick the Jets to be in the top 4 in this. Again, what are the expectations? The Jets have now changed the expectations, obviously, given the way they have played. But I don't think there's a lot of people that I don't know if there's a lot of people out there that think the Jets are Stanley Cup contenders this year. I don't know if that's the case. Maybe
other
if they
than
add
you, other than you. Well, I'm sorry. There's a lot of people. Who think that. I mean, I think everyone looks at that team and at the Jets and always thinks like everyone sees the potential in the Winnipeg Jets. Everyone sees.
100%. Right. I think if you asked a Jets fan between Toronto and Winnipeg who is a better contender, I think they say that. He is a father figure. I know this. But anyways, to me it's just a different animal in Toronto, and so that's hard to do. But if they can break that mold, I think they just win one playoff series, then all bets are off, right? Like,
Kenny, I want to ask you something because you know as much about baseball as hockey. I've wondered this after the Red Sox smashed, the Babe Ruth curse, the curse of the Bambino, and then we've seen the Chicago Cubs pull that off, and then maybe the St. Louis Blues last year. You could potentially throw that in as a team that went for a really long time. Has there been a sports psychology kind of learning in the sports world from those teams about how you become that team that is able to handle the weight that Scott is talking about with the Toronto Maple Leafs and get to the point where you realize that a team's history, a team's curse has nothing to do with you, because the Toronto Maple Leafs are a young team with some franchise type players who really easily could turn the idea of saying like, I'm Austin Matthews, I'm Mitch Marner, I'm William Nylander. What happened back in 1967 and since has nothing to do with me.
There's no doubt that Kyle Dubas loves baseball. He was on Swinging a Belt with Dan Shulman last year. He watches the Jays closely. I don't know for certain that he's had a phone call with Theo Epstein, but it would not surprise me in the least that if he had reached out to discuss this matter with him. Kyle's always trying to learn about things like this. He's big into culture and team building. I would imagine, again, like I said, I don't know if that conversation has happened, but I'm sure there have been conversations with people from those organizations. The Leafs, do they feel pressure? Of course, but I think that one of the things we've noticed since Kyle Dubas has taken over is that they embrace that pressure. Yes, they flamed out last year, but how have they responded? By playing a much more diligent game. They still have all the offensive weaponry, but they learned under their new coach, Sheldon Keefe, that yes, you can be freewheeling offensively, but you need to do these sort of details defensively if you want to have a hope of winning 4 rounds. So for me, Scott, I know we've argued about this, debated, let's say, not argued. In terms of the measuring stick stuff, I understand what you're saying. I do agree that the Jets feel that they want to be the team. Hang on. The Leafs have answered every single challenge to the throne. From Edmonton, from Winnipeg, from Montreal, from everybody so far. There is no debate. There is nobody that has been able to knock them off the pedestal. The Jets have played them soundly. Yes, they took 5 out of 6, but they didn't come away thinking, wow, we just blew the doors off the Leafs. Nobody's done that this year. So to me, that suggests growth. They have to do it in the playoffs, but I think that this team has bought in to knowing that they just can't be, an offensive team and try to win by, blowing the doors off people that way offensively. They've shown that they're diligent defensively. Now it's a matter of if they can pull it all together when it matters most.
That's the biggest question, right? Can they do it in the first round of the playoffs? That's all I want to see. Prove it. I'll change my mind on it.
Sure.
Right? But they have a lot of people's minds to change. And when it comes to a measuring stick, no, what are you talking about? I mean, the Jets are 3-4 points behind them now? 3 points, whatever it is after tonight?
6.
They're 4 after the game, but Toronto's up, so it'll probably be a 6-point deficit again.
It's going to be a 6-point deficit.
I don't think the Jets are intimidated by the Leafs one bit, and they were dismissive of the measuring stick storyline and narrative. Well, But
As they should be.
you also cannot ignore the fact that the Jets wanted to know how they stack up, which is the entire point of the measuring stick concept. It's not saying they think they're lower than them or that they're better than them. It's that they want to know how they stack up, and that's what they've been doing. And I don't think
the
that
Leafs want to see how they stack up against the Jets.
Of course they do, and Sheldon Keefe
Okay.
said as much.
Well, then that just the argument just goes. Your argument goes out the window then.
No,
Because if the Leafs looking at the Jets as the measuring stick, then is there even a measuring stick at all? No, there's just two really good teams, three maybe good teams here with Edmonton.
well, probably four.
that can go pound for pound with each other.
Right, but that's
So-
the whole point. You have to measure in order to find out where you stack up.
I personally think the idea of teams being ahead of each other, I agree with Scott in the way that I agree with Ken. I think that the Leafs have done a really good job of kind of taking on all comers and proving themselves, and I think that that bodes well for them in the playoffs. I think that the mindset, I think the fact that they're able to win, or play a game against the Jets, a big heavy team like the Jets, and do that, grind it out 1-1, but able to go out and put up numbers in other games. I think that bodes well for them. But I really do think I look at this playoffs as being a wash. Like I have a hard time. I know people are commenting in here, but if the Oilers went up against the Jets in the playoffs, would we really expect a playoff series between those two teams to be any different than what we've seen from them throughout the regular season and even last year, where they are basically one goal away from each other every single time? If we take a look at the depth that the Jets have, do we really think that a series against the Montreal Canadiens, I mean, we're talking about how deep the Jets are. The Canadiens have Suzuki on there as their third-line center right now. I mean, he is a phenomenal player. He's got great offensive instincts. So to have him there and then go to Toronto, again, I think their defense is really good. I think their biggest question mark is in net, and it's a question mark that may potentially be fading the way that they've got him. I mean, Scott, we've seen how many playoffs before where a goalie comes in and is a hero, right?
Yeah, but we're
all
still
it takes is one good series. What's that?
We're still, 18, 16 games, whatever it is, away from the playoffs, right? I mean, Jack Campbell's 8-0 right now. Maybe he's going to 9-0 or whatever tonight.
And it could all fall apart just like their power play has.
I just think,
I mean,
yeah, the bright lights of the playoffs blind a lot of people. That's all I'm saying. It's difficult in the playoffs.
It happened to Edmonton last year. They lost to a 12 seed. I mean,
know.
Everyone thought the Pacific was I mean, they were running away in the Pacific in a great division, and they got bounced by a team that wouldn't have qualified under normal circumstances.
It's tough, and I just think the Maple Leafs still haven't addressed their goaltending, and I think that's huge. I mean, I again, the X factor, going back to what I said earlier, Connor Hellebuyck, that's the guy. I think in a series, 7-game series or whatever it is against Toronto, I think Connor Hellebuyck emerges as the best because that's what he wants to do. And Connor Hellebuyck does those things. So anyways.
Okay, so let's tackle it like this, because you make great points of what Toronto is dealing with, of what they're struggling with. Kenny, great point on the Oilers and, being a fairly dominant team. In fact, if the Jets don't take that last game before the COVID pause from them, they're in the top 4 and they don't have to play their way in, and they don't have to worry about that series. But we've addressed those two. What reasons are there to believe that the Jets have overcome their own demons from the last 2 years? Yes, last year, all that kind of turnover, defense, injuries and all that kind of stuff. But the year before was the second year of that great 2018 Jets team, and they lose. We love to say that they lost in the eventually to the Stanley Cup winners. And Ken, I think you'll agree with me on this. Everyone says, a bounce would have gone here, a bounce would have gone there. They would have got past that St. Louis team. Except in every single series we saw that St. Louis team in, they got better and better and better and ground down and ended up walking away. No question, they were the better. Even though it went 7 games, Boston tapped out in the 7th game. It was the Sharks they played in the conference finals. The Sharks entirely tapped out in those last 2 games. I was on the ice after they won in Game 7 double overtime against the Stars. The fact that game went to double overtime was insane because the Stars were run all over the rink for 5 periods that game. This is a team that inexorably worked its way over the team they were up against. So I have a hard time buying the argument that a couple bounces and it would have gone the other way and they would have collapsed in front of the Jets, especially from what we saw from the Jets towards the end of that year. They were terrible. The second half of the year was terrible. So what reasons do we have to believe right now, tell our audience, that the Jets have overcome their own demons from the last 2 years when we know that Toronto and Edmonton are both dealing with their own demons?
Yeah, a couple things for me on that. First of all, you're right. I mean, but St. Louis also had to survive a post from Jamie Benn in overtime in order to win in double overtime. So as well as the Blues had played, they still needed an important break in Game 7. I mean, the other part of that too, and I know we've debated about this a lot also, the way that the Jets faded down the stretch, it was not a coincidence that they were without Josh Morrissey for 20 games and that Dustin Byfuglien probably still wasn't even back to full health. The reason why some people believed that if the Jets had won Game 5, where they were up 2-0 and they, inexplicably had the Kevin Hayes almost goal knocked out by himself after the Colton Parayko tackle, is that if the Jets had had the opportunity to get their feet underneath them after how poorly they played down the stretch, then that belief would have built. And then you tap into the reservoir from the year prior when the Jets had gone to the conference final. There's a lot of ifs there. I totally understand that. In terms of what the Jets have learned since that time, look at the growth of some of the individual players. Nikolai Ehlers especially. And again, Nikolai Ehlers did a great job of trying to battle through an incredibly difficult and painful injury. That nothing can be said about that. But his game has elevated considerably since that time. Pierre-Luc Dubois gives the Jets an element that would be, for me, another kind of X factor. But they also have Paul Stastny, who is such an important part in 2018 that they did not have in 2019 or 2020. Are there still question marks about the Jets once they get into the playoffs? Of course. There's question marks about all four teams that are going to be in the playoffs. Yep. None of them have really enjoyed any level of success. And the team that enjoyed the most success was Montreal, the team that shouldn't have even been in the playoffs had it only been a 16-team playoff. But again, Carey Price played great against Pittsburgh, bounced them. Then they played well against Philadelphia in the second round. But none of these four teams have had a real big, pool of playoff success to draw on. So there's pressure on all of them, in my opinion.
Scotty, what's your take on what makes this a better Jets team, more capable of winning in the playoffs Jets team?
Yeah, I don't know who said it here, but the center depth obviously is huge. I think the fact that you don't have to worry about, I think the third line is better than it was 3 years ago now, I guess it is. I think Mason Appleton is better than Brandon Tanev was. I think there's an offensive element there to that third line that matches up differently. That line was a purely shutdown line back then. They were very good at it, elite at one point, I wrote.
Didn't Tanev have a hat trick against the Bruins that year?
Yeah, whatever. But that's not, again, sustainability. Come on, Sean.
He had 14 goals on the season, Sean, and Appleton's already got 9.
My point is, I mean, I just think, so the top 9 or better, you have a fourth line that also takes minutes away from the top 2 lines, which is a good thing, because right now you're not going to go into the playoffs this time around having Rand, Scheifele, Wheeler, Connor, whoever it is.
That's a great point. That's a great
25 minutes a night all season for 82 bloody games, right? I mean, that's what they used to do to these guys. They were gassed at the end of it. And like, I can understand that, because we've seen this with other teams. This is not the only team that fades, but I think 4-line hockey for the Jets is something they didn't even have in 2017-18. I mean, I don't think Matt Hendricks and whoever it was, I think it was Joel Armia and Matthew Perreault, is a better line. I don't think that is a better line than what they have now. I think, Nate Thompson is an upgrade over Matt Hendricks all day long. And I think that, Joel Armia, whatever. I think you also have the experience on this team now of a couple players who have been to the dance as well. I mean, there's also the Jets core that has been to the Western Conference Final, so they know what that's like. They know what it takes to get there. But I also think you got a guy like Trevor Lewis that can kind of just, they've been in tough spots. Those Kings teams didn't just roll through everybody all the time. I mean, there were some games that they had to win. I think that you lean on that as well. And then you have a Connor Hellebuck who is better than he was back then, I think, now, having more, and also wants to prove himself a little bit more as well. So, again, that's kind of where I see this team being better. It's almost in all facets, the team is better. The analytics probably don't back that up. I know they don't back that up. But I think when you kind of put all these types of things together, having that 4 lines, being able to now kind of unleash those guys a little bit better, I think you're going to see. I think you're going to. I just think you see a better team in the playoffs, just with multiple, myriad different things.
Let's also not. Sorry, one quick one, Sean. The other part about that 2019 playoff run, when Brossoit was injured in Vegas, and I believe it was March. That was a big blow for the Jets because they had to really ride Hellebuck down the stretch run. I think that he was a little bit low in terms of the gas tank. I think he got run down a little bit going into that series with St. Louis Blues as well. And he's sharper this year because Brossoit has been able to come in and keep him rested and sharp.
North End Rick, also good point here. And we talk about the room all the time being whatever, good, bad. I don't know. I think this room is what North End Rick says here. I think there is a different. I think this season has bred a lot of that too, because you're the only guys that you kind of have on the road, right? You're the only guys you kind of have. I mean, maybe not at home, but I mean, I just think that the way that this season has gone, on the road, you're not going out with friends or families or girls. You're going out with. You're not even going out anywhere, but this time you are spending. It's pretty much just bonding time. I mean, what else are you going to do? I mean, guys are probably – there's a lot that goes into this, but I think mentally, too, on that side of it, this team is tighter probably, or just as tight maybe as they were in 2017-18. Again,
I was going to ask, is this the tightest Jets team that we've seen?
Yeah, I mean, Kenny, you've watched it more than I have over the years in other teams, AHL, all that kind of stuff when you covered that too. I mean, I think it is because everybody kind of knows the role on this team and they do it. Nobody seems to be asking for more. There doesn't seem to be a fight over ice time. People seem on this team, there seems to be some sort of harmony. And I mean, this is just anecdotal. I'm just, because I don't know. I'm not in the room. None of us are this year. We don't even get to see what the room is like this year. But, just after a loss or after a win, kind of, gauging, how people are handling it and all that stuff. But I just think, and Kenny, you'll speak to this more, but I think that they just do they seem to have this kind of connectedness about it. Everybody's on the same page. I think that's really the best way to put it. Everybody seems to just be, on the same page.
Kenny, this is your final thought. Make it count.
Yeah, I mean, for me, Scott, I think you're right. I mean, it's tough for us to really know what's going on in the room. I do agree that one thing that we've heard an awful lot is about how this team is a little bit more harmonious and just together. I think that's part of that is circumstances for sure. But I would also say, too, I don't think that we could ignore 2018, the Jets were a very tight team as well. So, again, I think that we can't discount that by any stretch. But now they have more experience, and they've had more heartache since then. So I think the other part of it is once a team goes on a run the way the Jets did, going to the conference final, they think they will be going there every year. And when a team falters with 2 early exits, I think that the ability to become more of a cohesive unit has more to do with that. And I think that's also part of the reason why, I mean, the Jets are in a little bit better headspace, if you will. And again, the other part, we talked about it. There were a lot of players on expiring contracts, whether they were RFAs or UFAs in that 2019 season. There was a bit more of a personal contractor element to that, where everybody or a lot of those people in those scenarios wanted to really cash in. And I think that hasn't been an issue this year. I think there is more of a collective feel. We've heard about sacrifice, people sacrificing ice time, sacrificing points, all of those things for, what teams would call the greater good in terms of playing the right way and all those other things. What will it mean at the end? We'll see, but it's going to be an incredibly exciting stretch run and certainly probably the playoffs.
Boys, we had another great show here. We were sitting at around 230 viewers at a time. That's why I'm shutting it down. We dipped below 200. I've got standards here that we need to uphold for the Kenny and Renny show. And standards include having really good guests. And we had a really good one here tonight with Scotty. I'm trying to find the comment here, but someone here had said Scotty came here. He did. Here we go. Jeff Johnson, who is always on our show, so he knows, says Scotty's done his homework before coming on the Kenny and Renny show. Most definitely you did. You did a phenomenal job, and we really appreciate having you. Hopefully you're going to come back. Don't take off because we're all leaving here. Don't try and skip out early on us here, Scotty. But we want to thank the audience for engaging. You did a good job of taking Scotty off his game. I got to say, there was a lot of laughs in there.
Jeez.
That's what we love about this.
It's hard to try and watch the chat and still listen to what you're trying to ask me. Yeah,
this is half my mind is on this all the time, but it's good because you know what? They're a part of the show. They direct the show. I had a whole bunch of stuff that I wanted to talk about. We didn't get to any of it because everyone had such good questions and such good comments. So once again, we really appreciate everybody. If you're out there and you're watching us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, go to our YouTube page and subscribe. We're doing this after every single game. Go check it out. Man,
look at this. This is a great comment to wrap up on right here.
There we go. 100 minutes, boys. Look at you go. Don't forget to like the video, folks. 987 subscribers. Almost at 1,000, gents. Well done. And it's all because of you out there. We appreciate that. Thanks for joining us. We will see you at the next game. We may even be wearing headbands, Ken, because it's a home game.
It's too soon. It's too soon for headbands.
Too soon? You got to leave them wanting more, but eventually you got to give the audience what they want, and they clearly want headbands.
Speedo. Straight from Sean's Speedo. I'd love to see that on Kenny's head. Yeah.
Right on, guys. Scotty, thanks for joining us. Ken, great job as usual. Audience, you were phenomenal as always. Mash that subscribe button, and we will see you all next time. Thanks for joining.